Well, welcome. Tonight's show affects all of us. I always get a kick because any parent with somebody in the school system, with a child in the school system, knows. As you get further and further along into high school, we are lucky to get an hour of undivided attention with our kids. We're going to talk about the people who influence 6 to 8 hours a day, and then, more importantly, really sculpt their education and help them apply, because we'll talk about some of the schools our kids are getting into. You know, at the end of the day, we have a biased view towards children in Milford. I think 4,500 of them.
Ooh, 4,600 Al.
46, it grows before I can say anything. But the colleges don't. And when you see, we'll talk a little later about the colleges our kids are getting into, really makes you feel proud. But let's start with an introduction if there is somebody that doesn't know you in Milford.
Hi, I'm Kevin McIntyre, Superintendent of the Milford Public Schools, and really pleased to be here this evening.
Now, I always kidded you for I don't know how many years that the school was adding one child per year. Because in 1974 we graduated 222, and up until a few years ago, 40 years later, we graduated 260. So it came out one kid. Boy, has the world changed.
Yeah, we're growing significantly. We've seen, I think in the last 5 years, just incredible growth. We've probably added the equivalent of a relatively large elementary school, about 400 students in roughly the last 5 years. Now, last year we did see a dip with in our enrollment a little bit, like the rest of the state and the rest of the country did due to the pandemic. But this year we were at our highest numbers ever. We're over 4,600 students right now. We could be, 4,700 by the end of the school year.
That's amazing. Now, all kidding aside, where do you put them all?
Well, that's the biggest challenge right now, and we're looking at, I think, a number of options, moving forward to the future, because we've also got 800 new residents between apartment complexes, condos, and new houses coming on in Milford over the next 3 to 5 years. So that's going to add additional student population to the schools as well. So we're submitting a new statement of interest. The big change from last year's statement of interest is we're going to add the 8th grade into the high school to create some additional, into the high school complex to create some additional space. And we're also looking at modular classrooms for the elementary schools to, just again, create some additional space and classrooms for our students and our student body, which is continuing to grow.
Now, when you talk about statement of interest, we live that, but
We have.
to the non-financial people, why don't you explain what that means?
Yeah, I can give you a quick 2-minute kind of introduction. So there's an organization in the Massachusetts government called the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and they provide support to communities across Massachusetts when they want to build a school project. And school projects are significant undertakings. We just completed the Woodland project. Now it's going to be 6 years, which is kind of crazy to think about that. But they provided about, I want to say 40% to 45% of the funding came from the state, 55% of the funding came locally, give or take. So what the Massachusetts School Building Authority does is it asks communities to put in applications each year. And what they do is they weigh which buildings have the greatest need, which projects, in current buildings have, the biggest issues, and based on that and a couple other pieces of criteria, they select a certain number of buildings to move forward into their process, which involves, vote by the town meeting and a feasibility study, and then you eventually move on to actually breaking ground and building the new building.
Now, Milford wouldn't be hurt by having to put up the money. I mean, we've talked about for 2 years that, what's it, $1.5 million for a feasibility study?
Just about, give or take. The cost of things are changing rapidly right now, so I'd say $1.5 million is a fair.
So, I mean, from that end, we got that money tucked away just in case they came through.
Mm-hmm.
So financially, I don't think we'd have, we're always going to have problems.
Correct. Correct.
When you start talking, I mean, Woodland amazed me at $60 million. When we grew up, you could have bought Milford for 60. They would have thrown in Hopedale.
Now,
Yeah.
now the crazy thing, Al, is Northbridge just did a similar project to Woodland, and it came in as 120 million.
From your mouth to God's ears. If it was 120, I'd be happy.
Yeah.
Not happy, but
No, I know. High
I'm
school
scared
projects
it's going to be
are,
150.
I,
Yeah.
I think it's going to. I think a high school project, whether it's a renovation or a new building, is going to be significantly. It's a significant undertaking.
You know, we talk about renovation or new. How could you build a new high school?
You know, I never say never. I think it's a big lean towards it's likely to be a renovation, and I say that for a few reasons. One is because Milford High School has fantastic square footage, and I'd like to keep as much of that square footage as possible. The state allots through formulas a certain amount of square footage per student, and I think we'd lose a lot of square footage if
We'd
we
have
went
to
to a new
shrink the
building.
students.
Absolutely.
I mean, when you think about the square foot per student that we have,
Yeah.
we're nowhere near their recommendation, are we?
We're way above it for the
Right.
high school right now. And a lot of it is, you know, we have a huge library, media center, which would never get built today. Our hallways are, you know, very wide. The-
Pool,
Yep, auditorium.
auditorium.
Yeah,
I mean, when you did Woodland, we have that cafetorium.
we do. And it's actually, it's one of my least favorite words in the English language, cafetorium, but it's actually worked very well. And the furniture in there, you actually, you can shift the seating from tables to benches. So you just like flip the cafeteria tables in half and they become two benches. And so you can put on a show at night and then put everything back together for lunch the next day.
But I guess I'm thinking, saying, if we were going to build a new high school,
Mhm.
the data I have says 200 plus.
Well, Worcester just did one for about 270 million.
Yeah. I mean, 270. Then again, 60 scared me, but 270 just seems crazy.
Yeah, it just the numbers are astronomical.
But the biggest thing in my mind is, where would you put it?
You know, the only thing I could think of is they would look very similar to what we did at Woodland, where they would put it either right in front of or right behind the building. Could be the only feasible place for something like that. And I have no vision for architecture or landscaping, but I think that's the only thing I could see potentially happening. I do think a renovation is much more likely, but one of the things we have to look at in the feasibility study is, you know, is the space that the grounds that the high school is on now the best grounds to either build or renovate on? If that's the case, then are we building or renovating? And we have, you know, a team kind of look at all those kind of questions.
I mean, the only space I can think of that's big enough, and I'm not sure it is Asylum Street.
Potentially.
But then I think about running how many buses up Route 140 and
Well, at the high school level too, it's more of the traffic, you know, with the student
Kids
drivers
driving
and the
and-
parents that drop off. And it's about 23 buses too. And
Plus,
it's games and
plus
activities.
it's sitting at the other end of town.
Right, which causes problems because right now we have a fair number of our students that are able to walk to school. And, you know, you do gain another, you know, neighborhood or two, but you also, I think it's not nearly as populous
Yeah, I mean,
as where we're at.
I've said from the beginning I thought renovation was the only feasible thing for us because people love the pool.
Mhm.
And last time I looked, the SBA doesn't pay for pools.
They do not. They do
People
not.
love the Davern Auditorium.
They do cover auditoriums at the high school level.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, not any other level, but at the high school level. they
Okay,
do.
that's good news.
Yeah.
But then I start thinking of the square footage per student
Mhm.
and how we'd have to get smaller students.
Right. Right.
You know, all kidding aside, we'd have to pack them a little tighter.
Correct. Correct.
And, you know, overall, I can't see it. And I'm hoping that somewhere in there's enough money to build a field house.
That's something we're looking at too, and we're looking at a lot of different options for that. But I would love to see a field house / community center where we're able to provide some health services to our student body, some counseling services, maybe some social services, as well as maybe like we do with the pool, where we open up the pool to the community a fair amount of the time. Wouldn't it be great if we had like a workout center and a track that our seniors and some of our adults could actually, so we're using it, 24/7.
Well, I mean, I go to places like Shrewsbury and all, and you walk in for a high school event, and it's like, wow. No, I mean, I got to give Pete credit because he does squeeze an amazing amount of lemonade out of the lemons that we give him.
Absolutely.
You know, so nothing against him and how he's using the auditorium and all, but the gymnasium, boy, we could really.
And I would say our outdoor facilities match anybody right now. I think, the turf fields that we have and, the different playing fields and, baseball diamonds and softball diamonds, I think I would put that up against any community. Where we have fallen behind a little bit is we still have the gym, which is great, but, a lot of communities have moved to kind of the field house model because it accommodates so much more. And it's great for particularly wintertime for practices for indoor track. We have our indoor track kids running up and down the hallways, which is, which is not ideal. So if you have an afternoon meeting and you're in that main hallway of the high school, you kind of have to look both ways because you could have 5 or 6 kids sprinting down at
Have
full
to put
speed.
a red light, a traffic light in the.
Exactly. They put a couple spotters at different points to make sure, nobody gets run over.
But, to me, the biggest thing is we have a bunker. I mean, the high school is built. Those walls, I mean, I can't imagine. But I'm not an architect. But they just seem so solid.
100%.
I mean, the roof has always been the roof.
Yeah, and that's our challenge too. Is we're seeing a lot of those systems kind of coming to the end of their useful lives. Our roof is getting to the end of its warranty. The boilers are getting to the end of their useful life. It's the plumbing systems, that sort of thing, are all things we would need to upgrade.
But that we'd have to do either way.
Correct.
I mean, whether we do new or
renovation. You're replacing those systems.
You're not going to take 40-year-old boilers and move them over to a new building.
Absolutely not.
But, I could see a lot of benefit by just renovating, maybe upgrading. The pool hasn't been touched.
Mm-hmm. And you look at Brookside, which was a renovation, which that feels like a new building to me when I'm in there. And that's, what year was that done in? 2000, was it 7 or 13?
Something like that.
Maybe 2007.
Well, then again, think about what happened to us at Brookside when we were going to do that quick renovation.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden we had to build half a school.
Right.
And that was taking 300 kids and trying to figure out where we're going to put them. From a practical point of view, what would you do with 1,200?
So it's actually 1,300
Oh, jeez.
because we're growing. I know it's 11 or 1,200 has been the number we've been using forever, but now we're up to 1,300.
But Kevin, with all due respect, the problem is the same whether it's 1,200 or
100%. 100%. I think you would. I think you wouldn't be able to. You wouldn't be able to kind of find portable classrooms for 1,300 kids. It just wouldn't be practical. And I think if we did a renovation, we'd probably phase it in where you do, maybe they'd reorient the school where where the courtyard is and the kind of the walkway.
We've never done anything with that courtyard.
Well, actually, the kids eat lunch in there all the time now.
Do they?
Yeah. I mean, COVID has really increased the use of the courtyard, I'd say, pretty significantly. We have students eating there almost every day
good.
outside. So, and there were some students previously, but I think it's really become like a lunch spot for the kids.
Because
outside of
I
the winter
could see
season.
building a new wing.
Mm-hmm.
And then when that's done, move the A wing into there. When the A wing is done, move the B wing and just.
I think that would be how we'd have to do it from a renovation perspective. And I know you hate me to keep going to the new building thing, but I think if there was a new building and there was on the grounds, we'd just lose a ton of parking, and we'd have to figure that out.
Yeah, the biggest thing is I keep getting back thinking about the areas. It's not that we would lose the pool. I just don't know if we could afford a new pool, new facilities at the same space.
Mm-hmm.
Because the state won't stop us from spending our money.
Correct.
It's just 270 million. Gulp.
Now, I think our rate we'll get back from the MSBA might be a little better than it was the last time, percentage-wise, the reimbursement rate. But that being said, if you're
Kevin,
talking,
let's say you get up to 50%.
well, I'm hopefully it's going to be more than that 60 to 70%.
Okay,
range.
60% on 270.
It's a lot of money.
Any way you shake.
It's still over $100 million.
Yes. I mean, we were fortunate that the town supported us so strongly. First on Brookside.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember getting laughed at when they said, well, why are you putting money in stabilization? I said, there's a school coming.
Right.
And I think people forget that we have 5 major schools.
Mhm.
Life expectancy 40 to 50 years before you have to
Yeah, do something
do
significant.
something.
Yep,
So that's once every 10 years.
correct.
Unfortunately, from a budget point of view, this time it's the aircraft carrier.
Correct.
You know,
Yeah.
the high school is
It's
twice
It's not the
anything.
tugboat.
Right. It's not the little boats that, not that 60 million was a little project.
No, but when compared to 250, 260 million that we're seeing consistently for high school projects, that's a huge difference.
Now, I kidded you all the time about adding 1 kid. All of a sudden, every year you're coming in saying 200 more, 200 more. 4,700 kids.
Yeah, that's where
Wow.
we could end up by the end of the year. And it's been a lot, outside of 21, which was like the big COVID year, where we saw a little bit of a dip. Every year, in the last 5, we've seen a pretty significant increase.
But are these all first generation and immigrants? Are these people from Massachusetts moving?
It's honestly a mix. We're getting, I'd say it's almost 100% immigration because the birth rates really aren't increasing dramatically in Milford, but we're seeing, people coming to us from other towns in Massachusetts, other states in the country, and other countries of the world are the 3 things we're really seeing. There's a number of significant projects, and I keep using that word significant, but it fits, where we're going to see, I think, about 800 new residential units potentially coming to Milford over the next 3 to 5 years, which is also going to have an impact on student population in town.
And you had mentioned something before the show that surprised me. In the old days, you looked at over 50 housing, and there would be 2 children coming out of the whole complex.
Mm-hmm.
As everybody talks about, Laurelwood didn't have a big impact on the school system in Hopedale because no kids.
Right.
But now you're telling me that's not valid anymore.
No, we're seeing a lot more student population coming from places like 50 and 55 and older complexes. We're seeing it from apartment complexes that have 1 and 2-bedroom apartments. And I think it's 2 things. One is we're seeing families starting later, but also we're seeing grandparents raising some children too.
Well, when you think about it, the kids who are graduating now,
Mm-hmm.
I think the school debt, my opinion, no data.
Mm-hmm.
If you're graduating with $50,000 or $100,000 worth of loans on your back, I mean, my parents worked at Draper's and General Motors.
Mm-hmm.
My mom made a whopping $11,000.
Right.
We were not a family that you could say, well, they got a lot of money to burn.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow my parents saved every penny and paid for my college. So when I graduated Holy Cross, I didn't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine what it's like to graduate owing $50,000, $100,000.
Well, you look at private schools. I've got twin daughters who are graduating high school this year, and the average private school is somewhere between $70,000 and $84,000 a year, and even the state schools are it's very affordable in the mid-30s, and sometimes it sneaks up to $40,000. So the cost is considerable. So you're seeing, I think, this generation of kids and the generation before putting things off a little longer than they had previously.
Again, I don't know how they can't put it off.
Correct.
When I started, I remember having a discussion with the president of Holy Cross, asking him about his writing ability.
Mm-hmm.
I said, you came from a Jesuit school. They're supposed to teach you how to write. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, I got a letter from you that talked about all the things you're doing to save money. And then at the end it says, and therefore it will only be $68,000 this year.
Right.
I said, Father, with all due respect, the word only and 68,000 should not be in the same sentence.
Yeah, it's going to get to a point where, like, the arms races that are happening in higher education are going to outprice a lot of folks, and you're already seeing it happen. The good thing in Massachusetts is there's a lot of great programs where kids can go to like a community college for 2 years and then transfer to, say, UMass Amherst, and make college very affordable.
Affordable. I won't use the word very.
Well, yeah, that's probably.
You won't use it. You got 2 at once.
Well, yeah, and I've got just one grad just graduating this year from college, so
I remember we had 1 year as a break. Lexi went 4 years,
Yeah.
then we had a break, then Emily went. That 1 year as a break felt wonderful.
Absolutely.
You know, and all of a sudden, I mean, when I graduated Holy Cross, it was 6,000 a year, 6,200. For Emily, it was 6,000 a month.
Yeah.
You know, I always said everybody should take the pleasure of filling out a FAFSA form, just for the ego of them telling you how rich you are. Because they tell you, this is how much you can afford. And I love to say, really? Could you tell me how I can afford?
And the awful thing is most of the colleges dismiss that number and put their own formula in
Right.
for you.
But just the idea when they're sitting there saying, oh, you can afford, your family contribution can be this much.
Right.
And you're looking at it saying, do we get to eat this year?
Exactly.
I can't imagine you with two.
Well, yeah, and I've got 4 total, so I've got one more coming in 2 years, too.
Wow. That'll be a challenge.
It'll be interesting. And it's, I think everything's, manageable if you kind of break it up into smaller compartments, but it's the cost of college right now is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, we're going through, your high school has a program where people signed up to mentor first generation kids. And I was so proud because, again, we look at our kids, let's say your daughters, the most beautiful, most intelligent, most in your eyes.
Absolutely.
There's no doubt.
Everybody's kids are gifted.
Exactly. But it's the colleges that give you the grounding to say whether or not Milford has a good school system. Because if kids, I mean, I always felt our educators should be held to educating my kids, not raising them.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, too many times now we're putting the burden on the teachers to also have to do a lot of the functions that, the parents always did.
Yeah, and it is a system we provide a lot of supports that maybe we didn't 10 or 15 years ago.
Well, I remember the worst thing Uncle Paul Raftery, our principal at Milford High, could do is ever threaten to call your parents. Beat me, put me out, stake me down with ants, do whatever torture you can think of, but don't call my father and mother. Because the idea that they would see me as embarrassing my family was probably the worst threat you could do. Today, I mean, what I see the teachers having to do, but somehow they get through it.
We have outstanding educators throughout the system, and I'm very proud of that.
I mean, the kid, the high school senior I'm working with, mentoring, he applied to 6 schools. 5 of them already accepted him, and he's waiting for the last one.
That's fantastic. And this is a crazy admissions year, too, because of the pandemic. So many students sat out and took a gap year last year. Northeastern University accepted, I think, 6% of their early action students. And overall, they've received 90,000 applications.
Holy moly.
Yeah. So it's an insane year for admissions. So I would say congratulations to that student, because it's, a lot of schools where we would expect a student to get into, sometimes they're being waitlisted because the volume of applications is just up.
So now, when we think of all the kids coming in, and I hate to, this sounds off color, and I apologize, but kids who are immigrants coming in tend, if I'm understanding right, tend to have more of a demand because they got to learn the language in a lot of cases. If you're moving from a town 20 miles away, well, most likely you've got the language under you and you don't put the extra.
Yeah, I would say our students who are immigrating from other countries or coming from other communities where they were an English learner, they have the double challenge of learning the curriculum and learning the language. And, that's nothing new in Milford. Milford's always been a community of immigrants. But, I think the strides that our students make and I think their dedication and their resilience is incredible. Because, and I've said this before, I think if you put me into another country and said, you have to be a superintendent, we're going to give you 3 years to learn the language and everything else.
In
that's
3
a huge
years, you're going to
challenge.
take the superintendent's test in Mandarin.
Yeah, I would say you're crazy. But, our kids are doing it, and they're doing really well. And, particularly if we get a student, at the kindergarten or early elementary level, like we've had kids that start with us as an English learner in kindergarten and go to Harvard at the end of their, career as a senior at the high school. So, we've had a great deal of success, but, the language barrier is a big challenge. What the benefit is we've got so many kids who speak multiple languages that it's such a huge benefit.
That's the one thing that when we go to Europe,
Mm-hmm.
because of proximity,
Mm-hmm.
you've got kids who grow up speaking 2 or 3 languages because the English language is the business language of the world.
Right.
So, they'll speak French and then they learn English.
Mm-hmm.
But they'll probably have a little Spanish thrown in.
Absolutely.
It's so helpful for them for their careers.
And it's one of those things, there's so many great things about America, but we've never emphasized like being, bilingual or multilingual like Europe and some other places in the world where, it's just expected. Somebody's speaking French and you're from Germany, but you jump right in and speak French with them.
Now, for years, you and the school committee have been saying that Milford is not like all the other towns around us, that we have special requirements because of our demographics.
Mm-hmm.
And we all agree and then didn't have enough money to give you. I mean, I have to admit, when I heard that you were asking for $6 million incremental funding this year, gulp. But the state, I think finally, if I understand right, has acknowledged that there's 3 cases: special needs, English language learning, and low income that
Yep.
put extra burdens.
Yeah, so we've really benefited from what's called the Student Opportunity Act, and the state is basically implementing the act in 6 phases, and we're in the 3rd phase of that this year. And so we received over $7 million in new permanent funding for the Milford Public Schools and in the community, and we're really focused on investing that in educators because our population is growing, the composition of the population is changing, and we really want to kind of set our students up for success in the future. So this year we added it's I think 25 or 26 new positions that are teachers, counselors, and kind of support specialists to really kind of ensure that our students kind of have their needs met and are set up for success.
That's always been the question. When you have kids coming in, and I was one of those kids.
Mm-hmm.
I've said before that when I left my house for the first time on Water Street, walked outside and said, "What are these kids speaking? How come they all can't speak Portuguese?"
Right.
But you start looking at the extra burden it put on. The town, we struggled. I think we did okay to keep up,
Absolutely.
but that was keeping up with 1 or 2 new kids a year.
Mm-hmm.
When the first pass of the budget came out, now I was worried about, 3 years ago we got the $1 million a year grant,
Mm-hmm.
that
The ESSER funds.
the ESSER funds that ended next year.
I believe so.
So my biggest worry was always, okay, where are we going to get $1 million to make up for that?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you started talking about 200 extra kids a year, I mean, that's almost another Brookside every year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or another Memorial. Memorial's a little smaller, but I was really pleased when the state said, here are the 3 big issues that we think put extra burdens.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's face it, we would have had to come up with the money anyway.
100%. And it's that, particularly special education, students with special needs and English learners require specialized instruction, which goes beyond what a general education student would require. So, our EL students need English language development. Our special education students, depending on, what their needs are, could be occupational therapy, it could be a little extra academic support, it could be a specialized reading program, it could be behavioral support, it could be, ABA therapy or support. It kind of runs the gamut. Just depending on what a student's particular disability is. And I think we've done an exceptional job as a district and a community supporting our students with special needs. And we've done that historically. And next year will be my 10th year in the district, and I would say that that's one of the proudest things I am of, is that we're able to really support students and keep most of our students receiving services within the schools and within the community.
But that's been a saving grace for us. Because when you start thinking years ago, when the school committee made the pitch to add the autism program,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember it was going to make money for the district, and a couple of us started laughing, saying, we'll be lucky if it saves us money.
Mm-hmm.
And thank God the school committee convinced the town to fund it,
Mm-hmm.
because
It saves us a ton of money over the years, and they do great work too on top of it, where we see just incredible progress in the students that we serve. And I think we're seeing similar things with the EL program over the last 6 or 7 years.
well, you think about it, they're Milford kids.
Absolutely.
You want to keep them in Milford, just for the fact they're Milford kids.
Correct.
But from a practical point of view, at $100-some thousand for everyone you place outside of Milford, what's the average? 15, 17,000 max that we spend per kid a year?
It's a little higher. Yeah, that's. I'd say our per pupil spending is somewhere in that 15 to 17,000 range. It's obviously a little more for the students with special needs because they're in smaller groups and they receive different services. But when we can do it, the killer for us is transportation. When we're transporting kids, it could cost anywhere from $200 to $400 or $500 a day.
I remember we had a student that had to go to the North Shore,
Mm-hmm.
and we had to pay for a taxi cab driver to sit there the whole time, because by the time they drive them up,
They just have to turn around and go.
turn
back.
around and go back.
Yeah.
So you sit there and say, like everything, it's our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that town meetings never done in my mind is turn away Milford kids.
No, we've had tremendous support from the community, which I don't take for granted, and I'm very thankful for.
Well, Kevin, let's face it, every year comes this time, and the school committee comes in and says, we need $1 billion increase. The finance committee comes in and says, we're broke.
Right.
Okay, we've gotten that out of our system. Now let's figure out, because we couldn't say you don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
When Kathy gets up and talks, 26 teachers, for the love of God. But when you break it down,
Yeah.
yeah. Now the question is, how do we afford it without making the price of living in Milford such that we chase away our seniors?
Correct.
And that's always, the biggest balance is the people who built Milford, the reason we're here. Some of these people are living on $1,500 a month. So raising taxes $100 or $200 is a serious thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're talking about picking up 400 kids, or 200 for each year for the next couple of years. And Stacy has so much room, they don't know what to do with it. I know I'm going to get hate mail from the principals at Stacy.
Absolutely.
But in all seriousness, we don't have room for them. So what are you going to do with 400 more kids?
So I think there's a few things we're trying to do. One is to add modular classrooms at the elementary level. Two is we're looking at bringing the 8th grade over with a new project for the high school complex. And three is, and this is the thing that scares me more than anything else, is I had the opportunity to talk to some superintendents from California. And right now in California, they're doing a 5-year kind of role. It's either a 5 or 6 year role where they're making 4-year-old education kind of like compulsory and mandatory. So they're adding universal preschool. And I think when it happens in one place, it's going to start to happen in other places. And so my worry is that we're not only adding whatever students we gain from the 800 new, housing units, also the growth that's just happening over the last 5 years naturally, and we're potentially, and hopefully it's long after you and I are gone, but I think it's a great program, is, states in the country are seriously looking at, some kind of universal preschool program where, maybe it starts with 4-year-olds where they're, getting, maybe like kindergarten used to be like a half day
I was thinking, this sounds like deja now.
Yeah.
Didn't we have this discussion way back when about should we offer half-day kindergarten,
Yeah. Yeah.
then full-day kindergarten?
Yeah. And I think the conversation is going to come sooner rather than later about, some kind of preschool programs. If it's happening in California, and I think it's happening in a couple other places in the country, it's eventually going to hit Massachusetts because we tend to be a leader in education nationally. And if we get a little behind the eight ball, we put in, investment in.
But again, Kevin, it's nice it's happening in California.
Yeah.
I don't care.
No, but it's something that has to be part
But
of the
if it's
calculus.
something that we should do for our kids,
Yeah,
that to me carries weight.
yeah.
If we go in front of town meeting like we did with kindergarten,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, we justify it and we rationalize it by saying the Joneses are doing it or
Right,
the
right,
town
right.
that, frankly, don't care.
Right.
Tell me about Milford kids. And again, I've been really, really pleased that the town meeting always seems to come through.
They really do.
We growl, we snarl, we
Yeah.
go through the whole thing. Once every few years we have a serious discussion. But at the end, there's 200 some people who really do love the kids. And when we talk about, well, how many kids do you have in the system? Now I can say 4,700.
Well, we're still 4,600, but we'll get there.
By the time we air the show, you'll
Yeah,
come
we
up-
might be. Yeah, by town meeting, we may be at 4,700. That's true.
But you start thinking about now is the time.
Mm-hmm.
Can you put eighth graders in a high school environment?
So what we do is we would have it's kind of back to the future to some degree, is we'd almost have an eighth grade wing where they'd be able to take advantage of some of the resources at the high school, but they would be kind of in their own area. And, the high school buses tend to just have ninth graders on them, sometimes 10th graders. And a lot of our kids participate in athletics, band, tons of different activities. So, I don't think transportation would be an issue.
But that's what we grew up with in Milford. If you think about it, one of the dramatic moments in life was walking across the street from Spruce Street
Right.
to Stacy, which is
Right.
now the library. But
Yeah.
and then just as traumatic was you had the high school and Stacy. So the eighth graders now had to go across the playground.
Right. Right.
So, in a way, we've already lived through it.
Absolutely. But it will open up space throughout the rest of the district. So if we do see future growth too, it will hopefully capture some of that.
Yeah, and I'd rather see us plan for it and spend the money now. We got 40 years out of this old high school.
Yeah, and it's been a great building for the community.
It's been a good,
And
solid.
and we use that building 24/7. We've got folks swimming at the swimming pool in the early morning hours. We've got programs running till 10 o'clock at night through community use and high school athletics, and we've got the new EL night program that we're running.
And you start thinking through it because I remember a few years ago we went through the whole generator issue
Mm-hmm.
when Carla said, "You want me to feed this town? You better give me electricity." And we
Yeah.
found out that Carla is not all omnipotent.
Right.
Even Carla needed electricity.
Absolutely.
But, you start saying that high school, God forbid we have a real emergency, that's the only place we can go.
Mm-hmm.
So that high school takes on more and more of a responsibility or a role to support the town.
And it's always your flagship building and part of the center of the community as well. Because we still get, huge crowds for football games, a lot of fans for, we just did a musical recently, great turnout for that. So
Well, even the Best Buddies pageant coming up.
it's awesome.
You got the auditorium. If we didn't have that, you do it anyway, but
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of nice to be able to have the swim meets, have the basketball games, have everything there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's great. And we even host like the, state championships, district championships. We host the state Special Olympics to stay on that theme each year out on the field. So, it's really a tremendous facility we've really gotten our use out of it.
Well, we'll see what. Like I say, we put the money away, expecting that you may say in the spring we need $1.5 million, but.
Yeah, I anticipate having to submit multiple times before they actually accept us. there's a lot of projects that are, I think like us are, in the mix right now across the state. And each project is more expensive, so they're able to kind of fund fewer projects in any given year.
So now we turn around and say it's coming to the end of the school year.
Mm-hmm.
How are the kids doing?
They're doing great. It's if I compare like where we were last year at this time, when we were just shifting from kind of our hybrid education schedule where the kids were on 2 days and remote 2 days, and now every kid is there every day. The masks are off. It really feels like a normal environment, and it's been great. The last 6 weeks have been fantastic. Spring sports are starting. We just had our second All-American in the history, at least in my history in Milford. A wrestler was named an All-American, which is fantastic. The wrestling team won the state championship. We've got kids getting into great colleges and universities. They're preparing for like the end of the year activities for our seniors at the high school. We've got the band getting ready for their different performances in the spring. So I think there's a lot of energy. There's a lot of enthusiasm. So I'd say overall things are going really well right now.
Well, I love the fact that you've just gone through every part of the Milford community. Too many times for years we talked about our football team is doing great, our baseball team is doing great. How about the kids that are out there, rain, shine, whatever, in the band? Oh, yeah, them too.
Well, I got to tell you, our music program, I would put up against any music program in the country. We have, the strings performances that you see, our chorus, our marching band. Nadine Pomeroy just does a great job of leading that program. She's so passionate about it.
Her and Mr. Moffat. I remember when my daughter first got her violin.
Mm-hmm.
God, it sounded like she was pulling the tail off of small farm animals. But to us, it sounded great. We never knew how much progress she made until they had the all-school event.
Yeah, that's a great program.
Well, it was just fantastic because all of a sudden the little kids came out and there were those farm animals losing their tails again. There's just a screeching that. And then it got to the high school and you said, oh my God. And then we had Claflin Hill, which had kids from our high school.
Right.
Playing in there. These are top-notch professional musicians.
Yeah, 100%. And our students always do well in like the districts and the states where they're recognized. And we've done a great thing the last few years where Nadine will bring like a quartet in and play at a school committee meeting, or we'll get some singers who'll sing like a couple songs, and the talent is incredible. And that's an area where I have no talent whatsoever, so I'm always so impressed when someone can play the violin or the trumpet or carry a tune, because I make Happy Birthday unrecognizable.
But it's just Milford, where regardless if you're an athlete, if you're a musician, if you're a chess player,
Mm-hmm.
the community rallies together to support you.
And the clubs and programs we're offering now, we have a Harry Potter club at the middle school.
Is that right?
It's awesome. There's a gaming club at the high school where kids get together and they'll play, different, board games, role-playing games. So we really try to hit on, everybody's interest, or, kind of try to meet as many needs as we can. And it's great because, you find people that love the same things you do, which is awesome.
But that's so critical. I mean, the fact that we're supporting all the kids in the school. I remember your predecessor when Bob Trombley got up and started with his baton leading. I had no idea. The guy could have been up there with a broomstick just waving it. But what I saw was the parents of the music kids. They saw their superintendent.
Yeah.
And it meant so much to them. None of us knew if he was doing it right or if he was just, he probably was. But,
Well, he was a legitimate musician.
yeah, with his
He was a trombone player, yeah,
Sure.
I think.
Trumpet or trombone. But, again, even if he wasn't, the fact that he got up there with the kids to try meant everything in the world.
Absolutely.
And, you don't give the kids enough credit for noticing.
Mm-hmm.
I always said my parents had no idea what was going on in school. Somebody would tell my father, you should go down and support your son. Put on his hat. He would get his suit,
Mm-hmm.
go down to the auditorium, sit there, have no idea what was going on. But I always remember when he was there. When we were on stage for something or other, and you looked out and you saw your mom and dad, it meant something. Just like it meant something that your superintendent was participating.
Absolutely.
Whether it was any good or not, that's secondary.
It's the trying that matters and the showing up that
Well,
makes a difference.
One thing that I'm very happy is that we've just spent an enormous amount of time talking about everything but COVID.
Mm-hmm.
But
Hopefully that continues.
I was going to say, we should get an update. How are we doing with COVID?
Yeah, so the last, we saw incredible numbers over kind of the winter, like post-Christmas through like February. And just like, the rest of the country did, with the Omicron strain. And I got to say, like the work that our nursing staff did, Dr. Murphy and the Board of Health, like they were awesome throughout the entire pandemic. Our administrators with the contact tracing and everything. We were getting, 150 cases every 2 weeks, sometimes 200 cases at the very peak. The last like 3 or 4 weeks, we've seen 1 or 2 cases.
Oh, wow.
So we've really it's down to next to nothing, which is great. I've gotten out of the prediction business with COVID because, every time we think it's over, it kind of comes back. But I'm very hopeful that, we can manage it moving forward. And I give a ton of people credit. We were all rowing in the same direction as a community, which was awesome. That really kind of got us to where I think we are today, where we're not wearing masks. We're able to kind of engage in school in a very, I think comfortable way. It's funny, Lisa Burns we're back doing field trips now. And so Lisa Burns said, this will be the first group that never went to the zoo until they got to 2nd grade. And you think about that and it's just kind of crazy. Kindergarten and 1st grader, this is their first normal year of school or semi-normal year of school. We wore masks for the first half of it, but,
I hadn't thought about that because, throughout the years, you think of 7th grade, that was nature's classroom.
Yep.
And then Washington, the 8th grade.
Yep.
That's a real tough thing to not get that.
Yeah, because a lot of people look forward to that. They're almost rites of passage in some ways.
Yeah, I remember my daughter, that was the first field trip that she went on without me. And
Did you survive it?
I barely did. But what we did is, just for kicks, we hired, and she said, well, Dad, there's no phones. You can't, no correspondence, no mail.
Right.
Okay, that ain't going to work. That dog just doesn't hunt. So we had a courier.
Mm-hmm.
And every day Emily would write her a letter and take a picture of the family
Uh-huh.
and Photoshop out Alexis and put in a second Emily. And write to Alexis saying how much fun it is to be in your room using your things. At first I thought Lexi would be furious at me, but then she said, no, Dad, at 3 o'clock the courier comes up the road and everybody's waiting to hear what's happening at home.
Oh, that's funny.
I mean, that was such a big thing.
But, the good news is all that stuff is coming back, and, the spring sports season is pretty normal. We're back to live concerts, and I got to tell you, the music department got very creative with, like, online concerts, and our drama department did some online productions. So people adapted and adopted, but it's good to kind of be, back in person, back what feels more comfortable.
Well, I became a fan of your AD when Pete came on the show and talked about student athletes. And he made it clear, he was talking about preaching to the choir, that they're students first and then athletes. And he gets it.
Mm-hmm.
That, 0.1% of kids will make a living out of sports.
Absolutely.
But the other 99.9 had better have a fallback plan.
100%. 100%. And they do a really nice job. I got to say, the coaches are really good about kind of working with and making sure that they're students first and kind of emphasizing. And the other thing they do, which I think is nice in Milford, is, if you're on the, the football team or the basketball team or the lacrosse team or whatever, you can also still like work in, playing the flute or jumping into the school play. We really try to balance that as much as we can. Sometimes it just doesn't work out, but where we can, we really try to get kids to be as well-rounded as they possibly can.
And that'll help them because when they get to college, I'm always amazed that kids who get to play even D3, D2 ball of some sort, that's a full-time job.
100%.
It amazes me, especially the D1 programs, that's 40-plus hours a week of work. Then you have that college thing there too.
Right. And you have to love both to be successful.
Oh, God, I really don't know how they do it because I had barely enough time for my first 3 years to keep up with my studies.
Absolutely.
And I just sat there and said, I don't know how I would have layered 40 hours a week. I guess you become disciplined, you do it. But it's nice to see somebody like Pete build that in right from the high school level.
I just wish he'd be a little more enthusiastic.
Oh, God. Yeah, he should have some emotion about Hawks.
Yeah, he might be the most enthusiastic human being I've ever met.
Yeah, and it's funny because you think of the eras of Nick, Zakili, and amazing. And you could not question he or his wife's love for the kids in the program.
Absolutely.
You could just feel it.
100%.
That was a Milford person with 4,700 Milford kids.
Yeah.
It's like Carla and feeding the kids.
And let me give her and her team a shout out too, because they were awesome. We just talked about the COVID pandemic. We provided, meals just about every day when we were shut down and when we were hybrid and over the summer. And, the number of meals they put together and the way they just made shifts to their practice. We've got a trailer that's connected to Memorial now that we're going to be able to use every summer to provide meals to folks, which is just awesome.
Well, her reputation and how much she cares came evident when you came to us with that surprise. We need $80,000 for a new fridge and freezer.
Right.
Most people would question. And when Carla came up and said, I needed to feed the kids in the town, we all looked and said, well, it's Carla. Who's going to question Carla on food prep?
Nobody.
Half of us have had Carla and Gina and the whole crowd cater our graduation parties.
100%.
And it was just kind of the minute you said Carla's got it, you weren't worried about are the kids getting fed good food, healthy food. You just knew. One ugly topic that has to be brought up. Crime is on the upsurge everywhere. Everything you read about is not good news about the crime statistics. Parents of Milford kids, how should they feel?
The Milford Public Schools are very safe, and they've always been a very safe place. One thing I will say is that we're seeing a greater level of dysregulation in our students this year, and that's not unique to Milford. It's happening everywhere. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, like I just talked about the field trip thing, where, kids have not been all together in one place at the same time. There's been stops and starts over the last couple of years. So, we're seeing behaviors at our middle school that we would see at the elementary level. We're seeing behaviors at our high school that we'd see at the middle school level. Our, kindergartners and first graders, we're seeing kind of early, preschool type behaviors. And, the kids are eventually going to get back to where they need to be, but it's going to take time. And so we're seeing, I think more behavioral issues than we typically see. But I'm very hopeful and optimistic that that'll start to decline over the next couple of years as we get back to kind of the business of school and students, understand the expectations and are able to kind of adapt to whether it's the high school, the middle school, or the elementary school. But I would say, the Milford Public Schools are a very safe place. We have a great partnership with our police department. We have 2 school resource officers who do a fantastic job and really get to know the kids. We have a great relationship with the fire department who, respond at the snap of a finger. So I would say, our administrative team is working, diligently, and our teachers are working to kind of, redirect our students that are struggling right now. And it's unfortunately not something that's unique to Milford. It's happening everywhere. I'm hearing it from principals and superintendents, not only across the state, but across the country.
But when you talk about misbehaving,
Mm-hmm.
these are annoying traits. These are not physically threatening, hurting.
We do have, our physical altercations on occasion, but I would say, generally it's, students becoming upset, students becoming, angry. But, there's the occasional physical altercation that we'll have as well.
Yeah, but it's fists, not knives, guns, and nuclear weapons.
No, we haven't had a nuclear weapon yet. We haven't seen that. And generally, it's I would say it's generally low level issues that we're dealing with for the most part. Every once in a while, we have a larger issue, but for the most part, it's pretty minor issues. It's usually interpersonal conflict, or it's a student having a very difficult time regulating their emotions in a particular setting.
But we haven't really seen what we read in the papers.
We haven't had like the huge brawls like that have happened. I think it was at Brockton. I mean, we've had probably more fights this year than we've had in the past, but I think a lot of that has to do with, kids coming back together and getting used to themselves and being around other kids.
But overall,
We're doing all right.
because I know people have asked us, why did we need a SWAT team
Mm-hmm.
if we're not worried? And I always say, I remember when that Chief O'Laughlin brought up the proposal, I looked at the chairman at the time, the FinCom, Chris Moran, and I said, God help us if we don't support this and something ever happens.
And they've been great to work with, and they've been very responsive. I don't know if you remember, but, I want to say 2 or 3 months ago was the Twitter thing, National Shoot Up Your School Day. And, it's a crazy thing, but it made parents so anxious. It made our students so anxious. But we had officers at every building. There was a huge presence. And I think that, lowered people's anxiety a little bit because, people were just nervous that,
Well, it's
'cause
like why we
if
put
it could
SWAT
happen
in.
anywhere, it could happen
It only
here.
takes one.
Correct.
And thank God, I hope we spend that money every year and never get return on.
And like I said, they've been great for a lot of other things that have been much more mundane.
Well, thank you for the update.
Always a pleasure.
As we now start going into figuring out what the next challenges will be. As always, we can talk about our schools, we can talk about our kids, and I was joking saying, I have the most beautiful, most intelligent, most everything kids in the world in my eyes. So doesn't every other parent. And that's the way it should be. But the real judge are the colleges that our kids apply to. Because if they didn't accept Milford's education, they wouldn't accept our kids. And our kids are getting into some great schools. And that's what matters. Get to know your schools. If you have questions, reach out. The school guidance counselors and all are some of the most open people you're going to find. They're happy to help. Because every once in a while you need a little extra push or nudge, or sometimes I think the best thing I ever heard is, oh, you mean other kids do it too? It's not just mine? That it's important. But get to know your teachers, get to know the school system, because Milford offers a heck of a lot. And as always, thank you for everything you do. To our 6 loyal viewers, may God bless, and may tomorrow be a better day than today. Good night, all.
Not too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just searching for my soul.